So someone wrote to me, "Your principles are too hard." And I wrote back and I said, "Look, the principles are hard. They're not my principles. What I'm giving you is just a little bit of leeway, a little bit of optionality, a little bit of roll. Like imagine someone's going to punch you, but as he's punching, because you see it, you start just rolling. And so when the force hits a circle, you see what it does? Bounces off. So you're not taking the principles one on top of another, because you will break. The principle of out of controlness is true. The principle of change is true. The principle of non-self is true. Which is to say, okay, yes, you have a self now, but that self is not necessarily you. It's based on a bunch of causality, a bunch of conditioning, a bunch of perspectives that ultimately are reconfigurable. You used to get angry about this, now you don't. That's the difference. You don't think about any angry things. You're looking for angry things to make you angry, and then you're just one by one just refusing to participate in a voluntary process. The delusion is it appears not to be voluntary, like it's so convincing, so gripping. You can't see it any other way, but oh no, you can. It's not normal to do that, but how much of normal is common and how much of common is vulgar? But practitioners can and do. And the key is not to think, oh, if someone would use this for inappropriate things, it's that using it for the appropriate things that are causing you immense amounts of agita. It could be a fear, it could be a past relationship, it could be a memory, it could be... Everyone is going to have something else. I love hearing about people that don't have any problem with metta at all. Like they have no problem with compassion and just feeling they're just natural well-wishers. They just so fascinate me. But they have problems with other things. Like they have problems with delusion. Like again, most of them are just pure idealists. So the most altruistic people are also the most naive. If they're kept within the confines of their social structures, they'll be of great benefit to everyone around them. But if they're exposed to outsiders that get them pointed in the wrong direction, give them an inverted goggles, this is the future that you should strive towards, and it's a drop off a cliff with a junkyard underneath and burning lava pits and just garbage, which we call, that's the hell realms. See, I'm so sensitive now. If I encounter a door, I put my hand on it, and sometimes I just leave it there for some time, because if I notice just a little bit maybe it's warming up slightly, there's some agitation behind this door, then I know I'm not going there. And I have the option. I just say no. What a great virtue to have, right? You just say no. No, I'm not thinking about that. I'm not going down that path. I'm not going to work myself up. I'm just going to drop it as efficiently and as cleanly as possible. Like a gentleman in a villainous city. He's not... If somebody splashes something on his jacket, he just, he'll change it out. Maybe right away, maybe not, but at some point he'll be back to his standards. Whereas the person who... acted with such... 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 acted with bad behavior, they're on a different path. And you don't have to think about justice. You don't have to kick them down that path further, because then you're down that path with them. You connect via an aversionary loop. Which is so surprising. Like, you would think the things you don't want are the things you're not thinking about, but that's not always the case. It's the agitating things that have many of our attentions, and that is just wrong practice. It is optional. If you're fuming about your birthday party three years ago, when everything didn't go exactly your way, or the equivalent of that, and some just abstract out whatever you're being agitated about. Look at it in an absurdist frame for a second. Can you see the humor? If it wasn't you, could it be considered funny? And if you say no, think of how many people laugh at slapstick comedy. You watch some good slapstick comedy and tell me you don't laugh. We laugh at the misfortune of others, normally, naturally, and also supernormally in a way, but not to the point where we take delight. It's also not a very smart thing to do if you realize that the same thing could have also happened to you. You can slip out on a banana peel from time to time. You can bump into a desk that's been sitting there for 30 years, but the lights were off and you forgot about it for a split second. You can stumble. You can get a flat tire. You can burn your house down. You can lose all of your money. You can get fired from jobs. You can get rehired. You can adapt. You can move from one apartment to the next, one part of the city to the other, one country to another. So use that simile. Don't live in a disastrous environment. Now, we can be born into disastrous environments, but we can also adapt in the most disastrous of environments, because that is the task at hand. So I'm on a ship steaming to the South Pacific. What am I going to do to make it as livable and as acceptable as I can? As civilized as I can under the conditions, which may or may not be possible. And of course, the less conditions I put on my satisfaction with what I have, the less I have to regret what I don't have. Last night I slept in the rain. Today I have a tarp. Things are looking up. That type of incremental improvements, they also don't cost much. But if you don't have the tarp, then you're experiencing the nowness of sleeping in the rain, which, based on the causality of your life, became your reality in this moment in time. But next week, next year, what next year, what next week, what next month? Comfortable people like to think way out into the future. It's quite foolish. It's quite delusional. And yet it's also quite common. But common is not good. Common is common. It's like, common is not bad. I think it's good to get into a good routine and then just get into that routine without the frictions that you would otherwise have, because it is based on causality. This is why scientists are so open to this way of looking at things, because of course the causality in the physical world corresponds to spiritual causality as well. And you start thinking bad thoughts, then you start saying bad words, and then you start committing bad deeds. It's interrelated. But it is up to the practitioner to break that causality skillfully. Say, oh, I know where this is leading, and stop it right there. Very quickly. You stop the weed before the roots get too deep. Because if they do, it can take you over, strangle you, and strangle others. It has. Even today, maybe there's 1,000 people that have been strangled by others who could not disrupt negative practices. Like if you think I complain about the normal and I call it vulgar, look, that's neutral. That's neither here nor there. It's just normal. But subnormal, can go all the way down to murder of every kind, which is the hell realms. You think about their motivations for a second. These are people that are out of control. Do you understand? That's why they call them demons. They're possessed. So it is a big mistake to lose your curation or your curating ability. It's a big weakness, and it's a stupidity. And anyone that claims otherwise is a foolish barbarian whose opinions, you know where you can place them on the scale of what it can possibly be encountered in the realm of human experience. Especially experts that are expert in wrong ways of thinking, wrong ways of doing things, and they also get the wrong results based on that. So there's a lot of unskillfulness among so-called skillful people. People who label themselves as skillful, but that they are not. And yet they do not question the self because they do not believe on an academic level that non-self is a thing. Because that would mean overcoming their ego, and they are their ego. So how much progress or skill can they ever have if this is their one iteration and it is foolish from top to bottom? But to challenge themselves on such in such a way they find is much too radical for the self. It's too much energy, too much possibility. It's like this person has infinity, but I've got this thing here, so I'm holding on to that instead. This is quite a childish point of view. It's quite understandable. It is intuitive to do that. It is normal to do that. Now, I would say in the cases of the experts, you're talking about a type of subnormalcy in that they can read these things, they can cognate these things, and yet they cannot allow themselves to be changed by these things, or they want to change this thing to their thing for, again, subnormal motivations. So I wouldn't say they're hiding in plain sight. I would say they're pretty visible. But they're a special type of person that, again, come back to the fruits of the processes and the ideas, the leading principles, and then the fruits. And then you can see, there's no real point in adding poison to a good recipe. There's no good reason to be agitated about these three things. When, in fact, it's better not to have them. So, but again, compromised people, worldly people, that, super smart people that remain worldly, they're just looking to use this for personal gain. Right? And it's not just our contemporary society. This is just the way the world in its vulgar form functions. See, if you were to interest yourself in the vulgar aspects of Socrates' life, not just his philosophical accomplishments, then you could see how he could have wasted his whole day with those little petty things. And some of them not so petty. I mean, finally, his illustrious career was brought to an abrupt end by abrupt barbarians. But again, perhaps philosophy it's not considered a good thing to all people. People whose scams no longer work because of philosophy. They don't like the philosophers who teach people how to avoid scamming themselves, particularly of a enriching, exuberant, and vital life. So, but it's funny, I do think that on average, or above average, it's possible that certain types of spiritual accomplishment are so viscerally understood on such a basic level that you would think that it wouldn't be misinterpreted or misused. And yet, this is the realm of testing. This is the realm of trial. This is the realm of practice. So go to a tree and hit it unskillfully, as hard as you can. Or actually don't do that. I'm not recommending you do that. But if you've ever done that, then hit it with skill instead. That's the qualitative difference of spiritual life that mental hygiene and spiritual resilience can bring you. But you also don't have to hit a tree. It's not wise to just have skill in hitting trees the right way. How about the skill of just not hitting trees? The skill of quenching the dragon fire's breath of greed with a magical potion so that you put it out, and that it's quenched forever. And you drink the dewdrops that accumulate in morning after morning after morning. I really don't like talking about bad European politics, but in 2023, if it hasn't hit hell yet, we're certainly really close. And this was after there was like a lot of enthusiasm around the year 2000. Like, this is the new millennium. We can put all this crap behind us, all the Cold War, everything else. It was just a total naive illusion that was pumped up by our disinformation, oligarch-owned media conglomerations, media companies. So then, and just think, if just consider him an oligarch or a face for oligarchs, then just imagine the type of disinformation that the Western world was subjected to, at least in the English-speaking realm, and then think that there's his equivalents in the non-English-speaking realm, such as France, and certainly in Eastern Europe, where oligarchs more or less were given carte blanche to do whatever they wanted in the name of capitalism, which was a total failure. That's the thing. It's like they set up vampirism, call it capitalism, suck the money out to themselves, and the population is impoverished. Then what that does is it discredits capitalism or the West in general. Then the Eastern oligarchs come in, start spreading money around to goons that are still left. And then, now, how do they sell themselves? Oh, they sell themselves as being right of the middle. They want family values and conservatism, but oh, by the way, anything the Asiatic Connie wants, they'll give them. Oh, you want us to appoint this person as foreign secretary? Sure, like in Austria. Like, you can't even imagine like how bad that is for a country to have someone who's on their side in everything, but being confirmed as one because they like that plausible deniability till it's no longer possible type thing. And then if you think that, oh, well, what's Austria? Because they did that with Austria's foreign minister. And then it was a nationalist party that made the deal with the Russians. A real slick young dude with malignant narcissistic characteristics, like a slick back hairdo, like over 6 foot something or other. That's something with politics. Like I said, anybody over 6'1", there really shouldn't be a reason why they're in politics. There's some type of weird outlier. They need to eat too much, want too much. It's usually also a sign of greed. Or some type of impunistic way of doing things. Like, oh, I'm just going to barge my way into this meeting and start talking, even though I'm built for the plow and the axe. But because I got such a big brain, I'm gonna come up with some self-serving strategy that me and my buds can divide up for ourselves. But anyway, yeah, Austria is significant because they more or less were supposed to keep the Balkans civilized, and they cut a deal with the Serbian faction, which is the Russian faction. So that means the Catholics and Western Europeans get sold out in the Balkans. Then you've got more or less the Serbians and the Turks there, the other 2/3, and the Turks swing with the Russians too. So they're unreliable, and they're also pursuing their own self-serving geopolitical goals that are antithetical to Westerners and Europe as a whole. Certainly transatlantic security. But coming back to Germany, so you had the gutted and lobotomized leftists, Leninists, just straight up and down Leninist, hateful, terroristic type people in green parties. Yeah, that's sort of one of the weaker areas that they targeted. And then they branched out from the green parties into all the crazy sabotage-esque type maneuvers, like setting up NGOs and coordinating people to flood Europe with immigrants that they don't need, while proclaiming that they were needed, and then allowing them to then get subsumed into criminal networks. It's not like these people get a job. They just get on the dole, take over quarters of the city that used to belong to working class or lower middle class people, who are forced to move out to so-called gentrified areas where the rent is like 3 times higher. So see Bono on that one. Then they get a couple of, fake franchise coffee shops and gas stations and what have you, and they just better be working two or three jobs, men and women. So the man just can't be the breadwinner now. We've got female egotism the endless pit of female egotism to cater to. So we're going to boost them up in the corporate world. But, oh, by the way, the small print, you both need to work and put the kids in daycare to make that thing work. It's not good for the kids. It's not good for the woman either, long term, or the man. But, oh, it's so modern. And certainly we shouldn't oppress them to being pillars of the family like they were in years gone by. That in the bad old times when that was possible and indeed just the norm. No, we have an anthropological fabrication that we're working towards. So get on board or you're a hater type thing. So, okay, so the weak majority parties that weren't pro-Russian enough are now getting polarized into the wig flip, brain flipped, wacko, hostile leftist parties, and then a fake national conservative party that is pro-Russian or controlled by them or financed by them. So these are more or less East Germans. That was the East German model. East Germans faked a sort of German nationalism, which was also a German militarism. Let's not forget that. They're supposed to be the first shock troops into Western Europe when Russia decided that it was time to complete their world military conquest experiment. So they were drilled. They were also the border guards shooting Germans trying to flee the workers' paradise. So oddly enough, those types of quasi-nationalist Germans, they didn't leave when the wall fell. They just stayed and tried to figure out something else with their Russian buddies who were licking their wounds in the 90s. And this is sort of what they came up with. Recreate a quasi-nationalism with Russian characteristics. So that's now the second biggest party in Germany after the election. Then you have basically fake weak conservatives that don't have real conservatism. They have more like selloutism, opportunism. The money's the most important thing. But it's funny, when they get into office, the money goes away. It gets siphoned off into schemes that they personally profit from, but the country, like again, Germany, that should be ramping up production, it's shrunk by 3-4% under the conservative pro-business government. Same situation in UK. Tories, they're supposed to be conservative. It's basically the self-enrichment party. And oh yeah, we're so clever. We're listening and spying on smart people. We're taking their talking points and just lying to the public and not delivering on any of it, just to get through to the next election. And then again, the self-enrichment just continues. So that's going on. Then of course they were talking about Austria. It's an urbanization, so urbanization of Austria. So sort of like pro-Russian elitist sellouts. They get deals on the backside to sort of fake play conservative nationalists like Orban. He's a nationalist, sure he is. He's counting all those digits in the bank. But how about this? He's sold as like a conservative to conservatives in the U.S. because they want to promote his version of national conservatism, which is Russian. But anyone else is a Nazi, remember that. So, because that's how the Russians like to play the game. Anyone not on board with them, they're Nazis. They're the eternal enemy. They're the continuous campaign. The poster children for the continuous campaign. And if they don't have one, they will finance one to just, every once in a while, this is an eternal problem. Look at this. We have this C actor that was out of work and was like 3 weeks away from a drug overdose. We gave him a salary of $300K and sent him to the Hoe House a couple of times. And now look at him. He's championing the Nazi cause. He wants to turn back the clock to Hitlerism. So of course they lose. Whoever is stupid enough to vote for those people, like, yeah, let's do that. That must be like a really low comic type of scene. And but yeah, of course, it's all democratic politics, right? It's really the will of the people, and it's a meritocracy, but it's not really. But they'll claim it is, and there's no culture war going on unless they say it is, and then it's only in the way they describe it and not in the way that, of course, Nazis describe it. The national conservatives that are pro-Russian, they know who to exclude from their nationalist conservative venues, because maybe there's a Russian proxy group they don't like, and that is a reason for excluding them, or maybe they're not pro-Russian enough. So, can you win with those people? No, not really. But again, maybe they do have, because they've adopted populism, which is to say a popularism, to win elections, which is something that elected officials have dispensed with this idea, because as insiders that have public relations campaigns behind them, or vet candidates well into advance for years so that nobody with innovative ideas or genuine leadership gets into their bureaucratic, blobist, administrative constructions. They've all agreed not to discuss popular issues en masse, or let's say maybe only 50%. As far as they're concerned, as far as the taxes are coming in, they're doing their jobs. And then look at all those taxes they're taking in. And then, okay, if they can throw some of that money to some of their friends or their associates, that's just what politics is all about, isn't it? I mean, that's how they learned it. That's how they've experienced it. So who are these other crazy people that would discuss popular issues and then win elections? Oh, well, it's the Russians. Oh, my goodness. So either the Russians are geniuses or these people are complete slapdash fools, or maybe neither one. It's sort of like a mix. So, but yeah, the Austrian failure is immense. The failure of the Austrian political system is immense. It's completely destabilized the Baltic region for all the bad actors. The failure of German democracy is a gigantic disaster. It more or less is swung to the East German version, which was a version that was so bad, and I have to admit, or have to say, it was sociologically, psychologically bad, not just economically bad. That's sort of the third thing down there's a third step down on the ladder to total dysfunction. That just like the Russians, they just claim that it was all better back in the past because things have gone so wrong. But of course, they had nothing to do with that. It was the eternal Western enemy that tricked them, according to their propaganda, which they blast out day in, day out on all different other types of also sub-political cultural levels. German culture, if there were specialists still working like they were in the 70s, they got all different types of saboteurs walking around with tenure in the universities, in the cultural milieus, all over the place. reinforcing that trope that it was better in East Germany. Can you believe that? Than it is today. And yet there are some talking points. Because one way that that type of gigantic lie can work is if you degrade the so-called Western system with a bunch of cultural warfare. A bunch of, oh, we so love humanity, we're going to bring in everybody and make this and trash this place. But we're championing Western values. So you see how they do that too? Discrediting the Western side, and then co-opting the real the appearance of genuineness, and yet it's a compromised party. So it's an avenue. They've used the nationalist opportunist conduit to get themselves into right of center parties, which are really the only legitimate. Really the only legitimate platform. The other platforms being completely discredited at this point, and yet they still seem to blob their way through time. So, but as far as Ukraine goes, their democracy isn't really working. They have martial law; they can't have new elections. Then the Polish election flipped. You did have genuine Polish nationalists, but petite nationalists, which meant they started to fight with Germany about reparations during a war. That's not smart. And then, okay, they say they were fighting with Europe, but actually that was the correct fight. The European Union is screwed up. You got big blobist ideologues and saboteurs and just gigantic corruption that are actively involved in sabotage operations using lawfare and going completely against the mandate of the European Union, which was a union of European states, not globalism. But that's what they've shifted to, even though it's super unpopular. They're trying to also hold off referendums and everything else. They won't allow referendums to happen in that case. So the EU has failed in its original mandate, which means there needs to be an EU too. But with the current sabotage political operatives running around Europe, it's really not looking feasible for that to happen, which means it's a divide and conquer strategy in its simplicity. And of course then China's trying to poach the most corrupt amongst the corrupt. And it's had success in Hungary, in Serbia, probably in Austria as well, Germany as well, France as well. Italy, I think, sold a port to them recently that they're conducting these hybrid operations in. So, because you need to have leverage people. People from their own country might have some, moral qualms about doing things that are destructive to their country, but foreigners don't have those moral qualms. They can compartmentalize it. They don't and won't ever belong to the country they're rotting out anyway. So, and if they disappear, nobody cares about that. And this does fit into the whole police mindset. Like, they like to be sadistically determinate. They like to have the control. You go to the prison system, there they are. They're up there controlling criminals. They like to leverage them. It's a little power play for sadists. So this is up their alley, so to speak, especially when it makes them millions. It's the only real job they have, because the pay they get from being and so why wouldn't they work with politicians, on that level that are also probably on the take or get some part of that business? Because you can't run business like that, like move millions and millions and millions and millions of years without a lot of accomplices in white collar professions. who, just oddly enough, surprisingly enough, might be really into politics for their own reasons, but not for the well-being of the country, that they're abstracting away into some global anthropological trope. Really helps the self-enrichment process go more smoothly for them, because then they don't have contradictions, because they're in an alternative reality where they're not being traitors, and they're not being, let's say, not committing a dereliction of duty. They're not causing chaos. They're not causing crime and violence. They're making the world a better place. From what a convenient explanation they've tailored for themselves. And they do get together. They like the group frame get together, men and women. Let's not forget the women. They're big on board with this. Like the women, they won't be delivering, producing, or shooting artillery, but if a position or a town or a territory gets rolled over, well, they're going to get rolled over too. I mean, of course, maybe half of them won't survive, but the other half, they're used to that from prehistoric times rolling over. So, but they'll put up a good show of seeming to care until that happens. And if they can preen themselves in political positions that they're 150% unqualified for, they're on board with that too. So 2023 disasters from a political standpoint, and the actors involved are pretty easy to spot. Now, will there be a catalyst back to genuine politics? Who knows? Maybe people are too comfortable. Even the Ukrainians, like, they don't have real political. The whole election before the war was a sham. It was pre-selected for the weakest candidate. Yet the candidate that was promising even a modicum of reforms from the old system was enough to get enough people to troll vote a troll in. But what's going to come after that? Petite nationalism does not make friends either. Poland being an example of that. Like, you need to be hard on certain issues, but soft on others. You need to have a better strategic, comprehensive flexibility. And going for like a hard petite nationalist could end international support. But on the other hand, going for the international support at the cost of true leadership is something else entirely. That's not ever advisable. So, but in a working political system, you'd have 10 dudes that could take the position and probably do okay with it. In the current decapitated political landscape, nobody, just nothing. Bunch of lawyers, bunch of friends of oligarchs, cousins of people that have ripped off, cousins and friends of cousins that have robbed the country blind, have cut deals with big agro companies or owned by Chinese and Iranians and whoever else wants to be there. Egyptians, probably. Walk like an Egyptian type thing. So, and there you see it's a war, so how many thousands of people killed, and is there any political candidates that can finally muster some type of majority together? Doesn't look like it. Like, who knows? Maybe lightning will strike. Maybe there'll be an earthquake, and out of the ground there'll be a stone that just rises up, and on top of that stone is the one leader that will pull them out of this mess till the next one arrives, instead of a healthy, dynamic, honest political culture that produces as many leaders as it can guns. Why not? Like, if you think of the political institution as an institution, think of it, if it was an institution of astrophysics, it needs to produce astrophysicists. You should have 100 graduates that are good at astrophysics, maybe per year, or at least have basic competency. If the political institutions are not doing that, then you need to just start replacing people, replacing institutions, replacing the way you do things. Innovating on that level, because without leadership, you will never win without good leadership unless it's a complete and utter act of God. Not that those things don't happen, they do. You really do hope they will happen, even with good leadership in there. But without good leadership, you're trying to do something with your hands and legs tied behind your back. You start running the blind. When the blind lead the blind, lead them into a ditch, right? And I say this also from about the Russian side. Just having Putin, the one big, or Xi Jinping, this is the Marxist Leninist model, one big dude to throw the franchise around. Is that good for most people? Yes or no? It's not. They have a stupefyingly ridiculous political culture in both of those big countries. And again, they want to make that the world standard. So certainly nobody should be for that. But the Western model needs to be completely remodeled with new people that are selected for having the best characteristics for future leadership positions. And they're going to be needed in the future more than they've ever been. Certainly for the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, certainly. So whatever fat butts and comfortable people are now inhabiting, occupying all those positions, they need to fly or just go, or again, close the doors of the old institution, or let them continue being ridiculous, but build something else somewhere else, some type of other parallel system. Is really the only way to do it at this time. And why not? That's what innovation is. It's like, okay, forget this jazz. Let's do it this way. It's not as complicated as people think. Stop negatively selecting for bad traits, weak personalities, inappropriate people. Oh, yeah, I want to be the leader. That type of person? No. They should be excluded. It's about who is more competent for the job. And competency is not just being a strong man or a hard man or a tough man. Leadership is all of the areas. It's diplomacy. It's foresight. It's execution. That's the other thing. The conservatives getting in front of conservative issues, parroting them and not delivering. No, your system needs to identify charlatans. And hopefully it can identify it even before there's an election. Because if they get in 2 years, nobody has 2 years or 4 years to put up with a charlatan. Nobody, no country on earth can afford that. One of those people getting in, it's a complete and utter disaster. It's hard to calculate how bad that is or can be. But certainly there's historical examples, and it's worse than you think. You don't know about it because they're not publishing it. But scientists of the future will go back to this time to look at all of these crimes, and they will connect the dots to the people, the so-called leaders that harbored them in. They're going to go into a textbook to be studied for centuries. What not to do and how not to do it. Nobody can afford to learn these lessons the hard way. Because I never like to end on a sour note. And again, forget sour notes. it's important to be realistic about certain things, but things change every day. Tomorrow could be completely different than today. In fact, tomorrow will probably be completely different than today, even if we expect it to be the same based on our normalcy bias, which is inbuilt and understandable, and yet look at how many times you've been surprised in your life that life changes from one day to the next. Our point of view changes from one day to the next, which is why I am 100% behind having persuasive arguments, not for the sake of persuasion, but because this is what one thinks is the correct thing, but one is also willing to put it out there for the public to decide. Do 1,000 people think this is a good idea? How many of the 1,000 don't think it's a good idea, and why do they think that? Like, you see how that process can be very beneficial if you don't have greed, ill will, or delusion. Although you might go into a position with delusion, you might go out of the, let's say, feedback process with a changed point of view, and it didn't cost you anything except investing the time into contemplating matters which could possibly be beneficial to a majority of people. So why wouldn't you do that if you were a well-wishing, generous person? Wouldn't it be the opposite? If you were a curmudgeonly type of miserly person, then you wouldn't say anything, even if you thought you knew the best answer. Like, I know that I'm right all the time, and then I'm going to keep it to myself and not challenge my beliefs. I love when I have a delusional position, or when I had a delusional position, and it was challenged. It wasn't sometimes it was not necessarily a frontal assault. It was a flanking maneuver. I didn't see it coming. And you know what I did? I changed my mind. I said, you know what? I was wrong. I was wrong. I like when that happens. Doesn't happen all the time. Of course, I'm not looking in the wrong places. It's not my job to solve all problems. It's only the problems that I might have, and maybe they're not problems if I look at them from the left flank, the right flank, upside down, from behind. For example, wanting perfection but not getting it, or wanting something more perfect than what you got and being disappointed with the difference. That's a bad habit. People can get into it, but if you see yourself doing it, you can stop it, and you do reap the day-to-day benefits from that type of skillful behavior. You do. You dodge those bullets. I'm driving a red truck, but I wanted a yellow truck, and so, that's the idea I'm wasting my time with. That's the type of vibe. Or am I driving? Am I experiencing, like I did when I first started driving, the exhilaration of driving, the fun of driving? I didn't care what color the car was or truck. Just getting in there and that type of powerful machine and hitting the gas, that was a thrill. But no, now I need to have a red truck, and it needs to be this type of truck, and all of these other contingencies based on what I'm doing that can just totally overcloud the exhilaration of driving, and yet I can keep coming back to it if I have that vital power to do so. If I can jump over the normal, through the normal, beyond the normal, smashing through the normal to the very rarefied air of perfect satisfaction. So what can you compare with that? Like, oh no, but you need $1 million too. Somebody in the crowd says that. And if I believed it, I wouldn't be satisfied, but I don't need it. It's probably better I don't get it. I'll just create more problems with it, right? Because I want a more perfect world. I want better things. That can be delusional. Wanting better too much is a form of desire. It's a form of craving. Wanting what you don't have at the moment. On the other hand, if you can reach a level of neutrality, you're not connected with what's there either. So, okay, it's this way, it can be a different way. Perhaps it can be a different way that's also more comfortable and more satisfying than it is, but if it's not possible, I can be okay with that too. I can return to a state of complete neutrality. I can come back to the 5-minute rule. What am I worried about again? Well, what about the next 5 minutes? Do I have enough life? Am I assuming I'm going to get 10 minutes? Because maybe I really do only have 5, or, oh, no, it might be 2. If I have to get into the seconds, then go that way. You got 2 minutes. Somebody punches a stopwatch that's accurate to the hundredth of a second. You got 2 minutes, click. You can see it, it's like projected on a big holographic screen in front of you too, and it's counting down, so like 1.59 seconds, 1 minute 59 seconds, then a second later, 1 minute 58, that type of countdown. That type of clock will be right at some point in your life, because you're not making it out of this realm alive, you're not. But it does matter what you do here. It does matter what you think, how you think, and whether or not you can change your mind. And I suggest you do when you're wrong. Now, when you're right, maybe no mind is better than what else can you have if you're right, other than rightness then. Live in a rightness. Don't question the rightness. No, don't look for more rightness. Right is right. Right is right enough. Enough of right is right enough. And the great thing about our amazing cognitive abilities is that they are really limited at the end of the day. Come on, how much was Planck thinking about his theories? How on point was Newton at all times? Did Newton have bad days? Did Newton do a lot of things that he could have otherwise done? How much malarkey was Newton involved with, really? If you were to ask him, he would probably say, a lot. Way too much. But for the times when he was on point, he really was on point. But not just a point. He broke through the boundaries of normalcy. He entered the ranks of supernormalcy. And yet even some skills, like for example the skill of driving very, very fast through irregular terrain with specialized equipment, that although that's sort of a skill, there's still a lot of out-of-controlness involved in risky maneuvers, and there's also a percentage of risk that is riskier than what would otherwise be normal. So which is to say you can have and experience subnormal conditions based on overperformance factors, as well as the out-of-controlness factor that is always present in such algorithms as life. So if you don't have to run too fast, then don't run too fast. If you don't have to, if it's better to run slow, run slow. If it's better not to run, don't run. And if you don't have to do anything, then don't necessarily do anything unless you feel it's appropriate. And that's something you should also question from time to time. Am I doing something appropriate? Is it in some way damaging? Is it questionable? And just listen for an answer unattachedly. You're not invested in a self that would not want to hear an answer, an honest one. And sometimes the answer comes back, I don't know. Я не знаю. And that's a good answer. It's really a truthful answer. It's an answer that has pure truth in it, many times. Which can also be followed, do I need to know? Is there a point of me knowing? And a lot of times you'll answer yourself no. And that solves the answer. That's the answer to your question. When you get into those types of agitated states of mind, that's something that can shake you out of it, that can snap you out of it. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. There is a way of walking through these stacks of newspapers. There's this little alley around and through that winds like a snake through the cluttered house at this moment, which was pristine, but because of an artillery strike, now there's debris everywhere. And just a very narrow path through the rubble. And everything that was there before is not there. It's been transformed within a few seconds. And irrevocably so. There you see the principles of change. Out of controlness. You see how fast things can change. See, our normalcy bias would suggest, no, you can't, a stone building, it's going to be around here forever. But that's normalcy bias. When it happens and you walk through it, you take a shower, the only thing that's keeping you there is mental preoccupations with something that no longer exists and therefore is delusional. But just because we see it, it makes it real for us, but it's not. That's the delusional aspect of it, and delusion is not good. It's not good to hold on to, especially some type of sentimental memory. It's like thinking of a flower that was cut and just obsessing about that as it withers and returns to dust. You don't need flowers to be satisfied. You don't need flowers to experience neutrality. So it is an addition and it can be a craving. And it is not noble, it's normal. There's a big difference. And nobility takes effort because it isn't normal. It isn't. It takes right effort, which isn't to say pretentiousness. It's not arrogance, it's not ego. It's letting selves go, especially sentimental ones. Because essentially it is a drowning person or a drowning program that will take you into the depths of despair, and there is no other remedy for it. Because it's of a spiritual nature, it cannot be remedied in this life. But perhaps in the lives to come. Coming back to the point, however, was I wanted to say a few words about Argentina. Because they were doing really well for themselves at the beginning of the 20th century. They really had no reason not to become a successful country. And yet they've now fallen into a cycle of destruction and despair. And based on my analysis of the matter, it does seem to be intimately tied with a lack of leadership, as well as a misguided type of leadership and a malaise that most likely does have to do with greed. Because again, greedy for money, greedy for political position. Greedy people don't stop with money. Then they're greedy for power. And then they're greedy for fame. They just don't stop. So a lot of cases you have trifectorates, quadruplets of personalities that are just greedy for all the things all the time. And that's when it pinnacles in a very powerful people who are able to indulge all of their desires. Then it can fall into personality disorders that throw entire hierarchies off cliffs and into complete destruction. And so no, these charismatic, self-satisfied leaders are not the solution for bad leadership. It's just a different form of bad leadership. Good leadership, it's balanced, it's neutral. It wants more or less what's the best for all parties except the criminal ones. And then add to that the ability to spot bad ideas and bad values and bad results, and then to suggest certain repairs that would work instead. Whether or not they're popular, that's sometimes the other side of the coin. Not everybody, the crowd doesn't know what to do in a lot of instances. Just imagine you're at a rock concert and the crowd all decides to run to the right for no good reason. So there was a bang. There was a couple of bang, bang, bangs, and then everybody, just these sounds like animals, start stampeding at a high rate of speed because they're panicked. Is that crowd going to have a good time or a bad time? It really does revert back to like swarming behavior, that life forms swarm together because there's some evolutionary advantage that more will get away, but many will just die in the process as well or become injured. And yet there's a net evolutionary gain for that. And yet you're involved in that as an individual. It's a group dynamic. So no, the crowds don't know the right way all the time. Which is, if we look back to ancient history, it was mostly organized by kings. These are just chief executive officers. Now, of course, they got some type of cut on the prosperity, but let me tell you, that prosperity was pretty meager in most places at most times throughout history. It's just now in the age of superstates with very well, perhaps too well organized taxation systems, that they become as infinity wealthy as some people think they are. But and even that is perhaps just a misperception. Because, again, a lot of these people are in tenuous positions, precarious positions. And then if you do precarious things as a precarious person, it can have a multiplier effect, which is unforeseeable and certainly not optimal. In many cases, suboptimal. That means not even normal. They lose normalcy as we know it, such as the Soviet Union. Such bad management practices and psychological, spiritual positionings, social positionings, that they destroyed their own system, bad management, and then just a refusal to change or adapt because of ideology, which was baked into the system for them to seize power as they did. Now, if they want to be the new czar, fine, but why not be better than the czar? That was their pitch, but they don't deliver. They're actually worse than the czar, which brings me back to the czarist or king model. The king should live well, but he should not live overly well. Because his job is sort of like, keeping an eye on things, keeping an eye on the borders, keeping the eye on policy makers and their implementation. So he's a busy man, and you don't want him, dying of pneumonia, so he might have to have some special well-tailored, perhaps well-designed, also perhaps representative clothes so that he can be active in all conditions, in all places, at all times. So, and his, let's say, value or his perceived value is really somewhat connected with his performance as a leader. If the conditions get worse, well, the buck stops with him, doesn't it? Which is made for very precarious times throughout history, and many of them did not make it. They didn't deliver. It might not have even have been their fault. So it's not something that even a greedy person should want, such a responsible position. And yet, if that governmental unit is able to provide, let's say, what is needed, and perhaps even a little bit above that, because it is sort of commensurate with the position, who should be living better than a king? Sort of a question. Because maybe they would think that they are kings when they're lorded up peasants, subnormal, of the subnormal variety, which there are many, believe it or not, but not all. It's the same spectrum from unskillful to skillful and normal in between. There's a variety. But it does seem like amongst peasants, when they lord themselves up, that it's the subnormal variety that ends up, probably via cheating in some form or another, that leads to them becoming more or less dynastic, while their system is based on the principle of shimshamery instead of, let's say, excellence. Now, not all aristocrats manage to improve their system of candidates for leadership throughout time. Many, in fact, eventually all of them failed, that no longer exist, and they are more than even scientists now. But for the ones that did survive and thrive, there were certain common characteristics, such as supernormalcy in leadership production, rather than widgety wonkies and the drug trade. So, but to come back to the facts of Argentina, so you had that, Perón was sort of a weird guy. And what, okay, he was big for the working class, he increased their wages, but they did not provide strategic direction for up and coming industries, i.e., industrialization. And so they weren't producing things, but he was able to raise their wages. But then you have more money chasing less things. That is the equation for inflation, and that's exactly what happened. And these lorded up peasants were too daft and inflexible, and we're going on decades now, to figure out the simplicity of that situation. And yet, it's not just the simplicity of pointing that out, it's also the complexity of executing it under unfavorable conditions, such as a barnyard filled with lorded up peasants that are too dumb to change and don't want to change anyway because that would mean more work, and they're all about subnormal pursuits, which also translate into subnormal actions on a personal and then finally social level. And then the system survives because one set of dunces gets thrown out, another set gets in, and people just haven't figured it out yet. When the penny drops, then they get rid of them, and the system throws them a similar bunch. Because more or less the system, the architecture for producing leadership is broken. Now, that does not mean that it cannot be fixed or reformed, but it would have to be a completely new design. And a design of a society that is value producing enough. So that, for example, now you had the opposite in places like Germany after the war, where you had incredibly talented engineers and people in an incredibly talented region. And they working together in an incredible synergy and creating incredible things that were of such incredible value that they vastly were vastly more valuable than, for example, bushels of wheat, where people can grow more or less anywhere if they had the right management, which, for example, didn't exist in a country like the Soviet Union, even though that shouldn't have been a problem. But when you bring in central planning with these planners who are blobists, affiliated blobists, also of direct criminal lineage, then you get to look and see what happened to the Soviet Union, which could have been just a spectacularly successful and brilliant experiment, and yet was just shattered. It's debilitating. It's a millstone around the few vassalized Europeans that are left in that territory, and certainly all of Eastern Europe, just a malignant, aggressive millstone on all of Western civilization, because they are a part of it, even though they want to continue with their BS exceptionalism. They could afford that when they were in the boonies, calling themselves the Third Rome. Now, they're part of the global West. And no, the global West does not want to be bludgeoned over the head with some dumb ideas and some bad leadership that developed under subnormal conditions. They really only know how to undermine things and troll them, but doesn't know how to do the good stuff, even though they pretend that they know it better than we do. Look, here's a memo. It's on some like faded yellow paper that you get in bunkers. It's written on it in a special green pen, "You're wrong." Now, for people that wrong, they can stay wrong. They're going to get wrong things. But for the new crowd, I wouldn't recommend going back to the past for failed ideas. Now, I also don't recommend shooting yourself into the future with cockamamie ideas either. There's something called balance, and that's what good politics are, carried out by beneficial politicians, right? Not the criminal variety, a completely new kind of politician that is also not a megalomaniac or necessarily a militarist. Someone who does understand something of the military, but more in a self-defense kind of way. And yet self-defense and offense are sometimes one and the same thing, but it's contingent upon being attacked, usually, and not attacking first. And why would you need to attack if your defense is okay, instead of being non-existent, as is in our time, especially on a political, socio-political, and economic, cultural levels? Now, I don't want to per se dismiss graffiti, but if there's graffiti in the wrong places at the wrong times all the time, you're not a better model. You don't really have enough cultural security. You're just sort of a subnormal type of sub-functioning type of place. You're defunct. It's a defunct type of place, defunct type of environment. There's really no winning and losing. It's sort of like an atmosphere of loss, which is a real shame, because then look at the potential that place might have if it was managed correctly. Which is to say, it doesn't neglect non-trivial things that are considered trivial by a bunch of vulgar buffoons and out to lunch idealists, if we want to be nice and call them that. People that are dead set, convinced on an anthropological fabrication that defies all common sense. Yet it's the entry to admission to the flipped 5% of people that should have nothing to do with any type of government, of any type of organization, anywhere, for any reason. But of course, yes, they do demand that you engage with them because they're the venue, they like to say. But people can fall through trap doors. You know, just like the county fair, have you ever been to those where they have a big container filled with water and there's a seat and they've got a target next to them, and you throw the ball real fast and hit it, the person sitting on the plank gets dunked in water? That can happen. And really, if you're a historian, like I sometimes like to be from time to time, and you look back even into recent contemporary history, they all go down eventually. It's really more about what's going to come after them, because I really can't imagine it being anything, could be any worse, but I have been known to be surprised about things that are on the more disturbing side of the spectrum. Certainly when a lot of money is involved going to the wrong people at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. But all problems have solutions, right? And I'm all about the better solutions and the worst things not happening. But of course that can also be mischaracterized. People who don't want to change, they'll claim the exact opposite. They won't even let a smirk cross their face. They'll come with a lot of drama and theatrics, like now happening, like Solotov, right? Coming in there, he's pointing the finger, he's playing out like a trope character with a lot of theatrics and very low truth content. And yet he thinks via the power of theatrics, he's gonna win over the crowd forever. It just doesn't. It doesn't happen. Half of the audience are in on the gag anyway, or maybe even more than half. So, but just because there's negative examples doesn't mean that we need to be obsessed by them. It's just, this is what was thrown our way at this time for not very logical reasons. Not very good reasons. But it might not, it probably won't stay that way forever. And I'm really already living in that promised land.